Welcome to Growing Ecommerce. I'm your host, Mike Ryan of Smarter Ecommerce, also known as SMEC. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Phillip Ivelio Vellin, who is an expert in analytics and tracking. We're talking about Google Analytics 4, the complaints, yes, but also the benefits and how to get it right. We discuss cardinality, data retention, migration strategy, consent mode and model data, plus server-side tagging. It's a great introduction to the topic, and now's actually an opportunity to update your data strategy. Phillip explains why this is core to succeeding next year and beyond. Since I just mentioned next year, before I start, I want to quickly mention that this is the last episode of 2022. We're taking a short break and picking up again in January. So a sneak preview. We have upcoming episodes, including a 2022 recap and a 2023 outlook, what's new at Microsoft Ads and on the Microsoft Advertising Network, a behind-the-scenes look at a giant Dutch marketplace clearing $5.5 billion in revenue, and our very first episode touching on Amazon Ads. There's a lot to look forward to there, and I want to thank you all for your support in the last year and a half of podcasting. I checked out Spotify stats for this podcast, and I found that 500 of you out there have this podcast in your top 10, top 5, or even number 1 spot. I was pretty blown away. And the real number was 499. Forgive me for rounding up. But if you're one of those top 499 Spotify listeners, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or wherever, please spread the word. Give this podcast a star rating or a review. It really means a lot. Okay, enough blah blah from me. Let's get into it. So, Phillip, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Would you get us started with a quick introduction? What are your skills? What themes interest you?
Well, I'm responsible for tracking and analytics at SMEC. So I advise our clients on what to track, how to track, and also do setups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. What about tracking and analytics is interesting to you? What catches your attention or sparks your curiosity?
Well, I think without data being tracked, you cannot measure your performance. So I think it's the foundation for all performance marketing. And without tracking and analytics, there wouldn't be much to do in performance marketing. So it's necessary.
Yeah, that's right. It's that data that differentiates it from brand marketing or other kind of traditional channels. That's right. And I guess we'll get into what's going to happen with that data in the future later on, or maybe we start. I mean, I'd love to pick your brain about Google Analytics 4, also known as GA4. And kind of just for people who might be a little less familiar, this is a major new version. I don't even know. You can tell me if version is even the correct word or if it's reinvention of analytics. And we'll also use the term universal analytics or UA, and that's kind of the classical instance of analytics. So tell us a bit about GA4. What is it? Why has it become such a huge topic during at least the last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, I think it's not Google Analytics 4 that became the huge topic, but more the switch from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4. Because for everyone who doesn't know yet, Google Universal Analytics, or also referred to as Google Analytics 3, will be faded out mid 2023. So starting from 1st July 2023, at least if you're not using Google Analytics 360, your Universal Analytics properties won't collect any new data anymore. I mean, you will have additional 6 months to look at your data, which is already stored, but you will not collect any new data. So I would say June the 30th is really the last day where you should switch, or where you should switch to Google Analytics 4. But my advice, or our advice, is do the setup for Google Analytics 4 as soon as possible. I mean, if you haven't done it yet, you won't have year-over-year comparison data in Google Analytics 4 anymore, of course, because it's already past July 2022. So honestly, don't wait for too long. Start collecting data as soon as possible, and make sure to get a proper setup, I would say, especially if you're in e-commerce.
Definitely great advice, because that getting a blind spot in your year over year data could be quite painful. I hope that most people have already at least set up their properties now. Maybe you're not in there in the user interface every day, but at least collecting the data and learning the topic. Um, that's kind of another thing about this whole switch. Like, what is it about GA4 that makes it so different, or often a bit painful for people? I've been hearing a lot of complaints on the market about GA4. Why is that? What are people maybe not liking about it so far? What's uncomfortable for people so far?
It is uncomfortable, I guess, because it's new. It's a new interface. I mean, to me, it's very similar to Universal Analytics, but still, it is different. You don't have that many standard reports anymore. It's more based on custom reports, so you can easily create new reports. There are some other points, like the cardinality issue and other things where you have the impression that GA4 is not fully developed. So there are still new features that will be introduced, I guess, and I hope so. And yeah, another thing that's missed is custom channel groupings.
Mhm.
So where you can group your traffic into various channels. Where in Universal Analytics, it was possible to do it, manually and set up like filters. And in Google Analytics 4, that's not longer possible. So you have to stick to the GA4 UTM parameter guide to get the right or the correct channel groupings.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that for you, it's not that different to Universal Analytics, but I guess for the average user, they're finding the experience a lot more technical, or the user interface somehow um, designed for almost a different audience than maybe themselves. Um, Also, well, I see you. Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, but um, listen, all almost all customers where we made Google Analytics 4 setups, um, they looked into Google Analytics 4, I don't know, once, twice before we did the proper setup. And it was not yet, how can I say, you didn't have to do a lot in GA4, and people haven't used it yet. And even now, I would say that the adoption of GA4 is not like everyone would use G4 and would prefer G4 over Universal Analytics, although Universal Analytics will be faded out in some months. So I guess, yes, it might be more technical. Um, I think we can agree on that. But people will learn how to get around in G4 as soon as they start really using it and analyzing their data. And yeah, if not, let's I don't know, let's do a G4 workshop or something like that together and go through the interface and so on.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I mean, it reminds me. I saw somebody wrote on, I don't know, Twitter or LinkedIn somewhere, that interest in GA4 will never be higher than the day before Universal Analytics sunsets. And that is so true just to human nature. And it reminds me, sorry if I've told this anecdote on the podcast before, but totally reminds me of when GDPR was rolling out, because we had some blog posts that were, about how to implement stuff with this and what you need to know. And we just watched the traffic on the blog post just ramp and ramp and ramp until really it was like the day before GDPR was going into effect. And interest was just skyrocketing. And I think there's an extent to which that will be true here too, because I don't know, humans are resistant to change or whatever. But I think it's time to start learning now.
Yeah, I think users will learn on how to get along with Google Analytics 4 pretty well.
Mm.
So it might take just some time, but it's better to start now when you still have as a backup Universal Analytics than wait for June and then yeah, I don't know, don't have any backup data where
Mm.
you can look at.
You mentioned, by the way, the word cardinality a moment ago. Could you just talk to us about the issue of cardinality? What is that? Why should we care?
Yeah, I mean, in Google Analytics 4, you have the dimensions which can be declared as high cardinality dimensions. So that would be if you have more than, I think it's 500, more than 500 different rows of data. And if you for example combine two or if you combine two of these dimensions, so with more than 500 rows, then in in some cases you might end up with, I don't know, 100,000
Mm.
rows, and you won't be able to see them in Google Analytics 4 anymore. So you will end up with, at least in standard reports, with a row called other. That's not a I don't know, that's not a wrong setup or something like that. It's just cardinality, and there are some workarounds. For example, you can use explorations. So explorations are custom reports in Google Analytics 4. You have other restrictions there, and for example, um, there are clients that cannot see all their items in standard reports, and they have another rule. Then I quickly make a custom report, and then every day all rows are visible again. I mean, if you need to see all, I don't know, 100,000 rows in your data anyway.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question of itself, but could be that other row is, summing up to a lot of your revenue or
Yeah,
something
it,
like
it,
that.
it does. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it sometimes does. And yes, I didn't mean that it's no pain, but
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely. But there is no. I cannot give a clear answer when this happens, because I've seen reports with 110,000 rows, and I've seen without the other row, and I've
Mhm.
seen a report with 66,000 rows, I guess. And there was another row. So
That's interesting. And also, like, you can get the complete data through BigQuery, right? Then you have access to your full data. Is that correct?
yes, and that's also a huge advantage of Google Analytics 4, because you can link it to BigQuery without using Google Analytics 360.
Yeah, that's good too. And I mean, I think what's another thing going on here where your data is not stored as long in GA4 as what people are used to. It's not stored indefinitely, right? I think that's a privacy compliance feature. But
Yeah. You're referring to the data retention period, I think.
Mhm.
And in GA4, at least in the free version, you can set it to 2 months or 14 months. But this only really affects exploration, so custom reports. So you will see data in standard reports for more than 14 months, even if you set the data retention period to 14 months.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. But we talked about a little bit about why people are uncomfortable here. It feels more technical. They're not used to getting around in there. There's some topics popping up, technical topics that make it feel a bit unfinished. I mean, but improvements coming along all the time too, like a bounce rate report that people were saying, "Where is this?" And that's come
Yeah, but
through.
it's now it's back.
Yeah.
Bounce rate.
I think it's calculated a bit differently, but
Yeah,
these things are trickling out. And but what about the positives? Talk about the positives here. How do we benefit from switching to GA4?
Yeah, I mean, the first reason, of course, is you will not have data in Universal Analytics anymore.
So
So
you have to
there's
do it.
yeah, there is no way around switching to G4 or to another analytics tool. But there are some things I can point out. For example, data-driven attribution.
Mhm.
So until now, Google Analytics or Universal Analytics used the last non-direct click attribution model, which means that always the last session that produced a conversion was credited with a conversion. So in G4, if you use data-driven attribution, this is actually for uh, many companies. This will be the first time to really see the online conversion funnel,
Mhm.
the user journey, and with an attribution model that is different from last click. In theory, you can see the impact that had the first social media click that arrived on your website, and the impact of the last shopping ad before the conversion actually happened.
Mhm.
So you will have a better overview of your marketing activities. Also, custom reporting with the explorations I've already mentioned quite some times. I guess it's much more easy to create custom reports. I think yes, it is different than in Universal Analytics, but yeah, people will get used to it, and you're, I would say, more flexible in changing those reports and adapting them.
Yeah, consent mode. Let's spend some time on consent mode. How does that work? What do you see as strengths and weaknesses of consent mode? I'm not sure if everyone is as excited about this, or what are you hearing about it, and what do you think about it yourself?
Yeah, I mean, consent mode tackles the problem that um, companies are losing data due to consent banners. So um, if someone doesn't give you consent, and you don't track this one, you're losing data. This can be a lot of data, sometimes 50%, sometimes 30% that you're losing. And it really depends on the consent banner implementation and the consent management platform. But yes, you're losing a lot of data, and consent mode is tackling this problem. So with consent mode, you're sending like pings also for those people who haven't consented. So you're sending pings to Google Analytics, and Google Analytics processes this data in a different way. So it uses it for data modeling.
Mhm.
So in the end, you end up with collected data and modeled data.
So Google kind of models what would that session have looked like if they had consented. Is that what's occurring there?
Yes, yes, in a way, yes.
But then, as a consequence of this, then you could have 30 to 50% of your data modeled instead of directly reported.
Yes, I mean depending on how you set it up, um, you can see only the collected data, so the normally collected data, but you can also see combined collected and modeled data. So that's all about the strengths. You asked about the weaknesses. I think that a lot of our clients and a lot of people in general um, have some concerns about privacy in this case. So my advice would be, yeah, check what uh, consent mode really does, and um, ask a lawyer about it.
Mhm.
So um, you should really make sure to not implement something which is against GDPR, or depending on where you're based.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen commentary that consent mode feels like kind of a backdoor, and that there's debate about to what extent is this really compliant, what extent isn't it, which I don't know. I'll leave that to legal experts to settle that one. But it's very interesting to watch it unfold right now. Yeah, just about this. So that's an interesting point. That's cool that you can. I don't know if I really had got that, that you can choose which way you're viewing the data, whether you're viewing only the collected data or the collected and the modeled. And that's another thing I wanted to mention too, with like you mentioned data driven attribution before. You can also do model comparison there too and view different attribution models pretty easily. Isn't that right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, for those who are more familiar with attribution models in Google Ads, you have this attribution model comparison report in Google Ads too. But of course, it's different data. But yes, you can see the impact that data-driven attribution would have compared, for example, to the common last click model, which was used in universal analytics. And you can also switch between those models in reporting in the settings. So yes, thank you for mentioning that. That's a pretty cool feature.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing because anytime you're dealing with model data, which let's face it, attribution, that's a model, and these modeled conversions. Again, we're trying to kind of backfill data that's getting lost in that case. So different kind of use cases there, but it's always a thing. This is just like a lens to view your website data through and your performance data through, and neither one of them is necessarily perfectly the truth, but they're designed to be ways that you can inform yourself.
Yes, exactly, and you always have to align with all parties which data model you're or which attribution model you're using for making decisions. For example, are you using last click for reporting and making your decisions with data driven attribution, or the other way around, for example? So that's a thing you have to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. And then and consider, okay, now how is the ads account optimizing? What kind of attribution model does that take into consideration? But what about e-commerce specifically? So like the intersection of GA4 and e-commerce. Are there improvements here or features that you want to call out or things that are possible with GA4 that weren't possible before?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, we've already talked about some of these features, some of these new features, but in the end, it's not. I would say it's not data that has a direct impact on performance, for example. But you still have to do something with the data. You have to make decisions based on data, and um, yeah, and so you have to get at first point you have to collect the right data. So, for example, yes, there's a standard e-commerce setup where you can set up with G4, um, but you also have to create the right reports on which you're going to base your decisions on. You have to create your own insights. How do specific products, for example, perform on a website? Where are people leaving the website, abandoning the conversion funnel, and so on. And especially when it comes to funnels, I would say it's easier in G4 to build these funnels because that was hardly possible in Universal Analytics. And also, I guess for a lot of companies, I think the connection to BigQuery will be a huge benefit. Maybe not now, when there's the switch to G4, and you have to get your data right, you have to set it up, you have to start working with it. But in the end, you can use the BigQuery connection for deeper analysis and also to connect your online data to your offline data, and then use your first party data.
I mean, we talked about that now's the time to switch if people haven't switched, and we've talked about kind of the pros and cons. So for people, I think it's interesting too for people who have switched already, but also for people who haven't done so yet. How do you recommend managing that migration, switch between UA and GA4, between Universal Analytics and the new Google Analytics?
I would say at first, think about what do you want to measure? Because you should not end up with measuring too much, but also not enough. Does it make sense to, I don't know, send 50 or 100 different events to Google Analytics, or do you maybe just need, I don't know, 10? And what are those events you're tracking? What events on your website? What are people doing on your website? What do you want to measure? I would say for e-commerce, there is a pretty straightforward e-commerce setup, but there's always something else you might want to measure, which is not covered by this e-commerce setup. So first thing, make sure to know what you want to measure. Next thing is log some resources with you most probably will need your developer, your web developer, and maybe a tracking agency or performance marketing agency for the setup. When the setup is done, make sure to keep collecting universal analytics data for now, to be able to compare the data. So it shouldn't be too different from each other, especially when talking about conversions and revenue. Also, a point you should not forget is you might have linked your Universal Analytics account to some other sources like Google Ads, for example, or Looker Studio, former Google Data Studio. So don't forget also to change these connections. You might have to create new Looker Studio reports, and you should also connect G4 to Google Ads. And especially if you're importing conversions from Google Analytics to Google Ads right now, please don't forget to also import them from Google Analytics 4. Otherwise, you might end up next July without any conversion tracking anymore in Google Ads.
Yeah, let's please avoid that one. I think that's good advice, especially right at the start there, to choose what events you really want to measure, what matters to you. Because you want to avoid this analysis paralysis situation, or getting when your line charts start looking more like spaghetti because there's too much stuff going on there. um, but really that's a topic that over time you need to maintain this stuff. You need to keep your annotations straight. You need to just sometimes less is more. You can always add more later on too. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to broaden out here for a minute before I let you go. We've got a little time left here. So I'm going to take advantage of that. What technical or strategic factors are going to offer some businesses a strategic edge over others? And what role does data play here?
In the end, if as I mean that's I think that's how this conversation started. Um, if you don't collect the right data, you will have a disadvantage over competitors. I think collecting data with G4 and keep on collecting data is like the foundation of your marketing, of your at least online marketing. But also, if I look at the developments in general with the fading out third-party cookies, and I think next year also in 2023, Google fades out similar audiences,
Yep.
and so on. So it will be more important to work with your first-party data. So it's impossible to get to know your audience as well as possible, and also try to connect your online data, if possible, with offline data. And you can do this with G4, as mentioned earlier, with for example BigQuery. Yeah, I think these will be the factors where you can benefit from a proper G4 setup.
Yeah, so just kind of the brilliant basics there, like getting this foundational layer really right. And it's just the foundation for decision making, optimization. So you want to make sure that you're measuring the right things, measuring them correctly, and avoiding any kind of a garbage in, garbage out situation that could arise otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
What's next in digital marketing? What trends are you watching? You mentioned a little bit like about the death of the cookie coming up, but or are there themes or strategies that you think are overhyped, underhyped?
Yeah, especially when talking about cookies. I think I would mention server-side tagging here. I cannot yet say whether it's overhyped or really a great thing um, when used for performance. You could, for example, use server-side tagging for working around ad blockers and extending the cookie lifespan. But in the end, in my opinion, it also gives you as much control over the data you're sending to, for example, analytics or especially analytics as possible. I would say in this case, it's the thing that's most relevant is privacy for me or for even for us as a company. I would say I'm not yet comfortable to say whether it's overhyped because it's not used by that many companies. But yeah, let's see. I mean, it also offers some other yeah chances. I would say.
I mean, I just want to pick that apart a bit because I think there's a saying that happiness is reality minus expectations or expectations minus reality. I don't remember, but basically there's like this, if there's a gap opening up between what you expected and what actually occurred, you're probably going to be unhappy. If things match up, you're going to be satisfied. And if actually reality exceeds your expectations, then you'll be really happy. And I think with server side tagging, there are some people who are maybe a bit overhyping it, and so not like to your point that it's tough to say right now. Um, I think so too. I think there there just was kind of one of these classic hype cycles occurring, maybe, and maybe it's not as like a magic wand as some people might have it in their minds. But if you recognize it for what it is and what it can and what it cannot do, then it's another option that you have. It's a tool in the toolbox. One thing that jumped out to me, though, you mentioned maybe I was over listening. I'm not sure, but or listening too close. But so you mentioned the importance of privacy. Sure. You also mentioned control of what you can send to Google. Like, is there something there? Could you unpack that? If so, if not, just wave me away that I imagined it. um, but for example, server side tagging could help you incorporate data like profit data, for example, that you might not want to share directly with Google. Is that right?
Actually, I didn't mean it like that. I
Okay.
really meant it in terms of privacy. So
Okay.
when,
Okay.
for example, a company doesn't want to share its user agent strings with Google,
Hmm.
then you could redact those with server-side tagging, for example. But yeah, actually it's correct. There's also the possibility to enrich your data you're sending to Google with, yeah, for example, margin data you don't want to share on your website. So you don't want to have on your website. That's also a possibility. And another thing would be writing to BigQuery directly via server-side tagging and not going through analytics and then exporting it to BigQuery. So that would be possible too. I guess it's in a way up to us to find use cases to really benefit from server-side tagging. Because if we don't find those use cases and don't implement them, then it will definitely be overhyped. But let's see what happens within the next, I don't know, I would say months.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I think it's a good note to end on. Like, if we go back to that expectations versus reality thing, we can also influence reality. We can take control into our own hands here by deciding what happens with implementations like server side tagging. Before I let you go, are there any projects or companies or people you want to shout out?
Yes, I would definitely shout out to people like Simo Hava or Charles Farina. Um, which do a lot for the community in tracking and analytics, with their blogs and resources they provide. That's really awesome of them.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of both of them, of Krista Seiden as well, and there's just a lot of really generous folks in the industry. I just want to share, like, I think the phrase that Simo uses, it's like altruistic knowledge or something like this. But it's the idea of like knowledge as charity, or sharing for the sake of sharing and not for the sake of I don't know, building your following or selling courses or whatever other kind of motives that there are out there. So definitely great people. And thank you too, Philip, for coming on and sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate that. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks for listening to Growing E-commerce. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing it with coworkers, friends, or within your professional network. We really appreciate it. This podcast is produced by Smarter E-commerce, also known as SMEC. To learn more, visit smarter